Hello from the European Parliament here in Strasbourg, where this week we've been hearing from Commissioner Designate for EU Climate Action, Wopke Hoekstra. He's a Dutch politician facing questions this week from MEPs over accusations of conflicts of interest. He used to work for Shell Oil, and scrutiny from civil society over how he plans to tackle the ongoing climate emergency. With me to tell us more about Hoekstra, his possible impact on the world of climate politics and weigh his chances of winning a crucial vote tomorrow here in Strasbourg is Left MEP Silvia Modig, our coordinator on environmental policy. And joining us online is Martha Myers, who is the climate justice campaigner and researcher at corporate lobbying watchdog Corporate Europe Observatory. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, David.
All right, Silvia, let's start with you. At the hearing on Monday with Mr. Hoekstra, you told him that, I quote, "There is a contradiction between your words and your previous actions." Can you give us a quick assessment of what you thought of the hearing overall and explain what you meant there by contradiction between his words in the hearing and his previous actions?
Well, he was really good. His answers were really good, and they pleased the left-wing climate politician very much. But the question was whether I can believe this, as he has in his previous lives decided to put his talent to work for Shell, an oil company, for McKinsey, a lobbyist for the most dangerous, environmentally dangerous companies in the world. And if you look at his political CV as the finance minister in Holland, you don't find climate-friendly action. So this was the contradiction that I would have loved to believe what he says. But when did this come? He said, for example, that I will always follow science. When did that start? Because if you follow climate science, it doesn't take you to the boardroom of Shell, does it?
Sure.
So this is the contradiction and the problem here. And he's a really, really nice guy, but I'm not looking for a new friend. I'm looking for the best possible commissioner for climate in the EU. And this is the problem. Can he be credible? Will we be credible when we go to the international negotiations?
OK. Yes, I think the question of his CV featured or dominated the hearing, and in particular his work for Shell, as you mentioned, but also a company known as McKinsey, a corporation. Martha, who's joining us online, could you tell us a little bit about this company, McKinsey, and what Hoekstra was doing for them?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I 100% agree with Silvia. I think the hesitancy we just saw from Envy due to the fact that he is just not suitable for this job. And yeah, if we look at his track record, he did start at Shell, but potentially the most dodgy part of his background was his time at McKinsey. This is a huge conflict of interest because he was working at McKinsey and also as partner whilst being a Dutch senator at the same time. McKinsey is potentially one of the most controversial consultancy companies in the world. It hosts pretty much most of the big baddies that we can imagine, from big pharma to tobacco to fossil fuel companies. In 2021, there was actually alarm bells raised from workers within McKinsey, raising concerns on the consultancy's fossil fuel company ties, because they advise 43 out of 100 of the most environmentally damaging companies in the world. McKinsey tried to reassure MEPs this morning that he did not work for an oil company per se in his time at McKinsey, but what about the other big polluters, you know? And I think this is what we really need to make sure that we becomes public from the information that we have. Okay.
Thanks, Martha. So we've got a bit of background there on Hoekstra, on the hearing and his CV.
Can I add something here?
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you, Martha, for your input. I agree with you completely. And my Green colleague asked in the hearing, he asked Mr. Hoekstra that could you make public all your affiliation, everyone you worked with at McKinsey. Yeah. So he has all the time had that option himself to pay the full transparency card. And that would have diminished a lot of the... But he doesn't seem to take our concerns seriously. He said that it was a long time. I worked for Shell for a couple of years after graduating. He seems to just brush it all off when there would be the option of full transparency, because Of course, we can change as persons. Do you know what I mean? But
Sure.
even that he doesn't want to do. So this is a huge question. And then it's left for civil society organizations and NGOs to do the digging and find exactly what he's been up to.
Put it out there in the public.
Yeah.
So where are we now in terms of the procedure, the process? Where are we now in the Parliament? What happens next? We've a big vote on tomorrow. What do you think is going to happen there?
Well, he has now gotten approval from the committee. He has gotten the needed majority from the committee, and I am assuming that that majority will also be intact in the plenary. So I think that it will proceed without any problems. And this is one thing. I am of the position that the Parliament should have more power. I think that we should have a legislative proposal right and so forth on. But there's a lot of power we have that we just don't use. Okay. This is one situation where the Parliament should put its foot down and say, like, come on, we can't have this doubt of credibility on our climate work we have worked so hard on. But that's left to see in the Parliament, but I'm very skeptic that we once again won't use the power that we have. And this also ties in with the other commissioner we're electing, Mr. Šefčovič, who then will get the responsibility of getting the whole Green Deal into a goal. And to be honest, he's also a really nice guy. But again, I'm not looking for new friends. He was not very convincing in having a vision of how to tackle the problems there are still in the Green Deal to get it to the goal during this mandate. So these all link together in a way that I'm very worried.
Yeah. And just to widen out the discussion a little bit beyond the appointments of these people into like the wider issue of you know, who directs EU policy or EU climate policy. I'm just going to quote Martha. You had an opinion piece on Euronews.com recently. I'm just going to quote a bit of what you wrote, and then maybe if you could comment on it. So I quote, "It's worth remembering that Hoekstra is not a lone wolf. His nomination is part of a broader systemic issue, the corporate capture of decision-making by big polluters." Martha, can you explain this concept of corporate capture, what you mean by that?
Yes, very happily, because it's quite a nerdy concept. But basically, it's very simple in the sense that we believe that, like, decision-making should be for the public good. And anyone that is working for corporate private interest really needs to be firewalled from this process. And I think, you know, fossil fuel companies are alongside chemical companies, large corporate agri-food companies as well, that have an extremely heavy influence over our politicians and are a real threat to our democracy. We know this in Brussels. We hear stories, you know, from many MEPs. You know, my favourite one was an S&D MEP saying that a fossil fuel company lobbyist followed him into the toilet. You know, this is just one silly example, but this is a real threat to the systemic you know, integrity to our policies, and particularly when it comes to the climate and energy policy. You know, at the time when we're seeing ravaging wildfires, why are we allowing fossil fuel companies into the room at all? But the thing is in European institutions, these people are not just welcomed into the room, they are invited as advisors and experts. You know, we saw in the Ukrainian response, von der Leyen's team met with fossil fuel companies over 200 times that year. So that was almost every day of the energy crisis response. So they were treated as the experts. We also, you know, Hoekstra is not the first energy commissioner that has fossil fuel ties. So Cañete, he was previously a CEO and owner of 2 oil transport companies and still held shares in them whilst being Spanish Minister of Environment. So we see countless examples of revolving doors between fossil fuel companies and EU politicians. And I think one of the most dangerous myths that fossil fuel companies have managed to convince our politicians over the last few decades, after they shifted from complete climate denial, is that they are in any way experts in the energy transition. Because at the end of the day, these fossil fuel companies and those that work for them will always put profit before people and planet.
Silvia, just on that point, is this something you see in your work as a member here in the European Parliament as well? Yes,
I do. And the lobbying overall is a problem here in the Parliament. I would prefer a model which is familiar to me from back home, where a committee together listens to experts and together decides who the experts are. So it's a balanced, you know, bunch of people. But here we don't have such a process, all MEPs listen to exactly who they want. Okay. So you might, as an MEP, come to the legislative negotiations and you have not heard one single idea that contradicts your own opinion. So if you only listen to the oil lobbyist, I mean, that is with whom's message you will come to the negotiation table. This revolving doors is a problem, and we should really have a legislation there that there has to be a cool-off period, and of course people have to be paid on cool-off periods, but I think that is a price I'm willing to pay for the fact that we get some kind of buffer zone, some kind of firewall between these two worlds.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, last question I have goes to both of you, I would say. The climate fight can sometimes be mentally tough, especially when you're up against some of the most powerful corporations in the world, the richest economic forces and political forces in the world. Silvia, what is it that gives you hope, and what would be your message to people out there fighting for climate justice?
Well, this parliament, this mandate, has succeeded in setting a new course for this huge tangle called the EU. We are not yet on the path of the Paris Agreement, but it's still there for us to go on that path. It's possible. So we have done tremendous progress. It's not enough. The work has to continue. But sometimes us fighting for the climate, we have to also stop and look at what we have achieved and be happy and proud of the work we've done. Because if we don't see the positive things we've managed to get, we will just all be exhausted with this. Yeah. And I see a huge change. This is such a big task. And we are winning this battle. We are. And what we are now hearing is the last dinosaurs trying to still give out one more scream because they know they're going extinct. So just keep up the fight. And then when it comes to this nomination, let's look at the positive side. Will the EPP ever listen to me? No. Will the oil companies ever listen to me? No. They might listen to Hoekstra. So if we are able to keep him true to his words, which he said in the committee, then we have a choice. Maybe he could find some kind of discussion, you know, with them that we could not. Yeah. So let's keep him on the right track and try to use it for the gain of the climate. Sure. How do you see, Martha?
Yes, I completely agree. And I think, you know, as you said, David, there's a real... In the polycrises that we're in, the amount that people are struggling at the hands of these large corporations and fossil fuel companies are a prime example of that. I say the one thing that does give me hope is that people aren't buying it anymore. People don't believe that these companies' myths, that they care about those in energy poverty, that they are, you know, the experts in the energy transition. You know, when we see Shell making record profits and then scaling back on climate commitments, people have had enough. And actually, you know, I think this is why we've seen such a mobilization around Hoekstra. You know, we got 100,000 people signing the petition within such a short time. We had LGBTQI activists, women rights groups, 50 NGOs calling for his rejection. We had youth activists, Greta Thunberg. You know, this went actually way beyond the normal EU bubble and the normal crowds that we have engaging with Strasbourg activities. And I think it's because people have had enough of like private interest being put before public good again and again. And I do feel like there is hope towards what Silvia mentioned of a conflict of interest framework and a firewall to ensure that these corporations no longer have the influence they have over our politicians.
So just to add one more thing, David, tomorrow in the vote in the plenary, I'm really interested in see how the Greens will vote, because we have so much in common in the climate work. We share the concern, we understand the gravity of the situation, and we share the understanding where the target should be. But it's situations like this that seem to defer us quite strongly. We don't abide to the corporate world. We are here to save the climate because we want to change the system, not the climate. And today, Mr. Hoekstra represents the system.
OK, well, we'll know more about how the Greens and all the other MEPs vote in that vote happening tomorrow. As Silvia mentioned, you can stay up to date on that on left.eu and all our other activities across our social media channels. Thank you for watching.
Thanks, David.